This is fiduciary responsibilities, and this might be one of my favorite slides to discuss. This is a relationship that you create with your client that is based on special trust and confidence. And when I think of fiduciary, I think of finances. What are we going to do for our clients to protect their strategy, their motivation, and their finances so that nothing can be learned by the other party that would put my client at a disadvantage negotiating? And there are 6 parts to these fiduciary responsibilities. The acronym that I use to remember them is COLDAC, COLDAC. Because when I sell a house, I want the air conditioner to work, right? I want them to have a working AC unit, is how I remember it. Now, here's the deal. Well, you've got loyalty to a client and putting their needs above everyone else's, you do still have an obligation to be honest with all parties in a transaction. And we're going to hit a couple of those examples as we weave through this list of responsibilities. And these 6 responsibilities are care, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, accounting, and confidentiality. Now, I will admit to you, for your career, this is a for your career comment. I actually use this in my buyer and seller presentations. Why would you want to work with Amy Schaefer as a real estate agent? And I consider this to be my job description. So if you're looking for content about why would someone want to hire me as a real estate agent, what value do I bring? Because trust me, you bring a lot of value to a transaction. Don't kid yourself. People need you. They don't know what they don't know about a real estate transaction. This is my go-to list. So this is probably why this is one of my favorite slides to talk about, is because this one is ingrained in my brain, because this is what I consider my job description. If anyone asks what I do, I'd almost rather talk about this list than even say I'm a real estate agent, because this is my true job description of what I do, though, as an agent. Okay. Care means that the public expects you to be diligent with a transaction and that you know more than the average person or the public. Think of all the time. I don't know how far you are through this course right now, but think of the time that you're spending getting your license, taking the exam, sitting through maybe some other coursework to perfect the craft or learn a certain niche of the business. It's a lot, right? You're doing a great job at it. Don't forget that. But it does mean that the public then expects us to know more than the average person about real estate. Obedience means that you must follow the client's orders, but within the law. Okay, you've got to follow their lawful instruction. So a great example that I've seen is you have a new listing and you get 35 showings for the seller. And they call you and say, you know what, Amy, we'd like for you to take the sign out of the yard. Now, on a test question like that, there's probably a couple good avenues that they could take you down on the best answer. One would be, we would coach and counsel your client about why they would want to leave the sign in the yard. And in reality, for your career, that's probably what you'd do. You'd say, oh gosh, you don't want a sign in your yard? Tell me more about that, because we've been getting such good traffic. But really what I think the exam is looking for is you to say you follow their lawful instruction and you take the sign out. Because at the end of the day, there's no law that says you've got to have a for sale sign in the yard when a property is available. Okay, so you take the sign out of the yard. Another good example that I'm just going to give that's happened recently, that I was involved in with an agent I was coaching, but she had shared with me that she was one of 5 offers that had been presented to the seller. So they're in a multiple offer situation, and the agent called and said, the seller is requesting a photo of each of the buyers. And she said, that feels weird and inappropriate. My clients were highly offended, but they also really wanted the house. So they chose to submit a photo and they got the deal. But as a follow-up to that, looking at it from not the buyer side, but from the seller side, did that agent follow the seller's lawful instructions? And from a fair housing perspective, which I know we're going to be talking about later in this course, from a fair housing perspective, I'm going to say no. Because the moment that the seller sees a family versus a single person in a photo, or someone in a wheelchair, or maybe the color of the parent's skin don't match the color of the children, or there's a certain religious, like a cross or something on a necklace, and the other 4 people that didn't get that offer accepted, they're probably very disappointed, and they could be wondering, is it because of one of those things? And that would be a discriminatory practice. In that situation for your career, if you got a seller that asks for something like that, because believe it or not, that's not uncommon for a seller to say, tell me about these buyers. Are they families? Do they have kids? They kind of want to know the scoop. My stock answer to that is, I don't know, nor is it my place to ask, because as we agreed to during our listing period, we're not going to do any discriminatory practice. I don't want to put either one of us in jeopardy. So instead of asking those questions and maybe violating a fair housing law, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on your highest net profit in the least amount of time and the least of inconveniences to you as a seller. We're looking for the best deal for you, which is my polite way of saying, we're not going to focus on the gossip. We're going to focus on the figures. What offer is best for you financially and for convenience of these 5 offers. But if they did say, can I have a photo? Here's what I probably would have responded is, that's a great question, Mr. Seller. Tell me more about why you would want a photo of all of these buyers. Well, we've lived here for 40 years. We want another family, right, to move in. And I would say, that is great. I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I know what a great steward you've been of this home and how much your family has loved it. However, by asking questions like that, we could be setting ourselves up to a situation. And my job is here to be here to protect you, not to put you in a position where you might be accused of violating a fair housing law. Okay, that's obedience. Next up is loyalty, which says you must put your client's interests above your own. Now, I often use the phrase, you don't want to do things that have your clients feel like you have commission breath. Woo! Right? Like you're only out for yourself so you can get that hot commission at the end of it. That's what I call commission breath. I think it's pretty obvious that you don't want to do some of those things. And during your time of getting your license, you will have some ethics training to really dive into kind of that side of it. But loyalty in terms of the exam, what I think you should be prepared for is, let's say you go and show a property with a buyer and you walk in and you think, man, this would be a great investment for me. I've been looking at getting into the Airbnb business. I'd kind of like to write an offer on this. What do you do? Well, the answer is you should never compete against your clients. That would put them at a complete disadvantage when negotiating. Because if you wrote an offer for a buyer for $200,000 on a property, and then you decided to write one yourself, do you know what you would do? You would do the Price is Right, right? $101, Bob. You'd write it for $200,001 to outbeat them. That wouldn't be fair. The trick that you might see on the exam, though, is they might bring it up as not just you competing, but you should also not represent immediate family to compete against your buyers. So not your spouse or not your in-laws or your parents. Immediate family should not represent, as an example, to compete against your buyers. Disclosure. Clients must remain informed about all the facts of a transaction. And this comes into what you might learn through the course as material facts or a material adverse fact. And while we do need to keep a party's information confidential so that they're not put at a disadvantage when negotiating, there are some things in the transaction that we must disclose no matter what. And that is those material or material adverse facts, is what we call them in Iowa. A material adverse facts is anything that would change the value of the property. It would change a party's decision to even go under contract. It would change the structural integrity of the property or pose a health risk. Okay. So for example, a seller gets water in the basement when it rains 8 inches over about a 36-hour period. The only way a buyer would know about that water in the basement is if they only went and looked at the property after it had rained 8 inches in 36 hours. Otherwise, they wouldn't know about it. But it would change a party's decision to maybe go under contract. It would affect maybe the structural integrity. The only way we know about that fact is that the seller must disclose it no matter what. And if they refuse to, you as the agent now have an obligation to disclose it no matter what. Even if the seller doesn't want to, you're now responsible to do it. Okay. So a great test question is a seller says, I've had water in the basement and I don't want to tell anyone because I'm afraid no one will want to buy my house. What do you do? Well, there's two maybe good answers. One is, don't take that listing. You don't want to work with a seller that's a liar. And I kind of get what that one is saying, right? Because you want to protect yourself. And if they lie about that, they'll probably lie about other things. But the best answer is, even if they don't disclose it, now that you know about it, you must disclose it. You're responsible for it. And water in a basement is a very common thing that sometimes does not get disclosed. And I know that my sister and her husband had a neighbor that sold their property and didn't disclose water in the basement. And then my brother-in-law was the one that accidentally spilled the beans when it rained one time. And he said, oh yeah, they borrow our wet vac to clean it up all the time. And those new neighbors sued the old neighbors, excuse me, and received a $10,000 settlement. So if people think for your career, if sellers think that they're going to hide something, they're probably not, because the neighbor always hops the fence as a welcome and starts telling all the things that they know. It's just how sometimes it works. So again, with that disclosure, you've got to keep things that would put them at a disadvantage when negotiating confidential. But there are some things that you owe to the entire party, including the other side of the transaction. You've got a duty to let them know about it too. Those would be those material facts or material adverse facts. From an accounting perspective, clients must be able to have an update of where they are in the transaction at any given time. So a great test question around this would be, if a client calls and wants the status of their transaction, when do you owe them that update? And it might say every 10 days, every 30 days, every 5 days. But the best answer is upon request. Anytime you are asked, how are we? Are we good to close? Where are we in the process? Did the buyers deposit the earnest money? For example, you should be able to get your clients an update upon request when they ask. Last but not least is this idea of confidentiality. Excuse me, and I know I've mentioned this previously, about my big rocks to help you kind of break it down would be their strategy, their motivation, or their personal finances. Do you think it would put a seller at a disadvantage for me to say, yeah, they're getting a divorce, they need to sell it really quickly? A buyer would hear that and think, fire sale, they want to sell it quickly because they hate each other. Let's write a low offer. That would put my clients at a disadvantage. That might be something to keep confidential. You've got the house listed for 200, but you know your sellers would take 190. Is that okay to disclose it? Would that put them at a disadvantage when negotiating? Absolutely. So if you are truly going to disclose that they would take 190, I would get that in writing from your client that it's okay to disclose that to someone. Okay. What about a buyer that writes an offer? Let's say a $200,000 property it's listed for, but they write 190. The opposite is okay for you to say, you know what, we've written 190, but they want it really bad. I bet they'd come up. No, it's not okay to say that, again, unless you got written permission from your client, because those would be some examples of what would put them at a disadvantage when negotiating. So this is one sheet that I would take a quick screenshot of, to be really honest with you, because again, I think it's a great example of what you do to represent your clients and your job description, and how you have that special relationship of putting your clients above your own interests, and for the most part, everyone else's interest in the transaction.